Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. So we haven't talked about vaccination for a while. And, generally speaking, I've been aware that the US has vaccinated about 60% overall. And I intuitively assumed that there was some kind of partisan split because of some of the numbers we've been looking at, but I did not realize how disturbingly horrible the partisan gap is. So let's go through what we've known for a while. We've known for a while that there was probably some partisan split on vaccination. We've seen that for the greater part of 2021, COVID cases, hospitalizations, and deaths have been disproportionately happening in the reddest red Trump counties compared to the bluest blue Biden counties. We've seen how the COVID death rate, since vaccines have been widely available, is about 3 times higher in the reddest Trump counties compared to the bluest Biden counties. And again, this came with the intuition that part of the explanation must be vaccination rates. Now, I also have said, even in blue counties, it's likely that the deaths are still skewing towards Republicans relative to that county's population. We now have data on vaccination, and it is even worse than I imagined. At this point in time, 96% of Democrats say they've already been vaccinated, while only 54% of Republicans have been vaccinated. There is no lesser vaccinated group than Republicans at this point in time in the United States. Democrats are getting vaccinated at nearly twice the rate of Republicans. This is no small detail. This is from polling done by Monmouth University. Let's take a look at the numbers in more detail. So you see the clear partisan divide. 96% of Democrats have been vaccinated. 79% of independents have been vaccinated. And a pathetic 54% of Republicans have been vaccinated. Now, just as interestingly, 30% of Republicans say they will never get the vaccine. Another interesting thing, those who are not registered to vote actually got vaccinated at a slightly higher rate than those who are registered to vote. That's interesting. Also, along educational lines, there is a gap. 87% of those with a 4-year degree have been vaccinated. Only 73% of those without a 4-year degree have been vaccinated. So, not a big shock. Education leads to vaccination, just like education tends to lead to people being more liberal, voting more for Democrats than from Republicans. Now, interestingly, there's almost no income gap whatsoever. You might speculate, you might not, I don't know, but you might speculate that among different income groups, you would see vaccination at different levels. The vaccine is free at the end user point, but maybe there would be some reason why you'd see different levels of vaccine uptake based on income. We don't see that. If you make under 50K a year, 78% have been vaccinated. If you make between 50 and 100K a year, 77% have been vaccinated. I mean, almost an identical number. Those making over 100K a year, 79% have been vaccinated. I mean, essentially no impact on vaccination status based on income. So really interesting numbers, and also just stunningly low Republican vaccination. So at this point, I don't know that the Republican Party cares about the personal tragedy, the fact that way more of their people are dying than others. I mean, after all, it's all humans, right? Maybe they care, maybe they don't. I don't know. Politically, this will mean fewer Republicans around and alive to vote in the midterms, particularly since it's disproportionately voting age people that are dying as a result of the virus. Now, Republicans will still have gerrymandering working for them. Republicans will still have voter suppression. They'll have, trying to use the courts, all these different things that we've seen them now try to do. But there will be disproportionately fewer of them. Could it affect close races? It's still really not clear. We ran the numbers. I'm going from memory now, but we ran the numbers looking at Ron DeSantis's last gubernatorial win in Florida. He's the very Trumpian Republican governor of Florida. I hope I'm getting this right. I think DeSantis won by about 30 something thousand votes. And when we looked at the deaths in Florida and started to say, okay, if these are 60-40 Republican deaths, if these are 65-35 Republican deaths, could it make a difference in the next gubernatorial election? And the answer is it could. It's not an open and shut case. There's a lot of caveats, but the point is it's conceivable that the math would point that way. On partisan death gap alone, you could see a case made that it could lose the Florida governorship for Republicans. So if that's conceivably possible, certainly there are congressional districts where the death gap on COVID could make a difference. Whether they care about the people, I don't know, but you'd think they would at least care about elections. So earlier this week, we kind of hit OAN pretty hard because they deserve it. OAN is this wacky right-wing propaganda network. And I think I said in the segment, Fox News is right-wing propaganda. Newsmax is extreme right-wing propaganda. And OAN is like completely insane right-wing propaganda. And I even said, compared to OAN, Newsmax sometimes will sound sort of a little bit reasonable. Today, I have an example of Newsmax not sounding even at all reasonable. And this is a really instructive segment. I'm going to play for you one of the most hilariously and horrifyingly ignorant segments that I've ever seen, I would say, on any network. I don't know that I've ever seen a 1-minute segment with such ignorance. There's a Newsmax host named Chris Salcedo. I actually think I've been on his show before. If I'm thinking of the same guy, he used to have a radio show, maybe Philly, I don't remember. I think the interview I did with him on his radio show might even be on our website in the press section. From what I recall, he was much less ignorant back then. The ignorance was less weaponized, although it was still bad. I don't know if what I'm about to play for you are his genuine views or what he has to do to be on the good boy list at OAN, but he went on a rant yesterday, climate change denial rant. I can't make heads or tails out of it. I don't know how someone can be this dumb. And again, he might not be dumb. This might just be overt propaganda. It's like brain rot of some kind. Like his head is filled with mayonnaise or honey mustard or something. It's almost like his brain fell out of his head. So let me play the clip. Listen to the mind-blowingly ignorant and incorrect things that he says here, and then we're going to break it down piece by piece.
As to the science of the socialist religion, from experts I have read and interviewed over the years, I can say that there is no proof that man's CO2 emissions are destroying the planet. If that were the case, the world would have invaded communist China long ago. They build one so-called dirty coal-fired plant on average every week. If China's CO2 emissions were destroying all life on Mother Earth, and China is the world's #1 CO2 emitter, why would Obama, Biden, and the rest of the American left leave China alone and instead destroy the United States manufacturing base and our energy production? Joe Biden claims that warmer temperatures make weather more destructive. That has not been proven. What has been proven is that warmer weather results in more food production, less starvation, and less death. What has been proven is that the Earth has been at this temperature before, back in the medieval period. Not too many coal plants and SUVs trolling around at that time, right?
So you really have to slow down and think about each aspect of this one at a time. The mind-blowing stupidity is notable, but the wildest aspect is he almost seems like proud that he's saying this stuff on TV. He genuinely seems to think it's clever. So let's go through it piece by piece. He talks about science, the socialists' religion. You can make the case that sometimes people allow dogmatism to enter their view of science. And when that happens, we should criticize it. But science is not a religion. And when people say science is your religion, you can believe in Christianity or you can believe in science, that's very much wrong, because science exists and is the same regardless of whether you believe in it or not. Nobody believed in Christianity, Christianity disappears, right? Science encourages being corrected. fixing mistakes and has self-correction mechanisms. And in fact, when you make the bigger the correction you make in science, the bigger the accolades, the more revered you are. Religion doesn't have that. Self-correction is not revered in religion. So these analogies, science is the religion of socialists. Maybe there's some dogmatic people when it comes to science. It is very, very different than a religion. He says, experts that I've read and interviewed say there's no proof that CO2 from man is destroying the planet. It's always hyperbolic, and there's always some semantic game, right? So, okay, well, destroying the planet is a big statement. The scientific consensus is very clear that elevated CO2 caused by industrial activity. Now, would they say, well, humans didn't do that, the factories did it? That's a distinction without a difference. That is bad for the planet in many ways. Its effect on climate, its effect on the ozone layer, accelerating the greenhouse effect. This is the scientific consensus. Could it be wrong? It could. Many people right now are trying to disprove it. None have been able to so far. It remains the best explanation we have right now. That's how science works. He says, if CO2 were really this bad, we would have invaded communist China by now. You know, the issue of China's pollution is a huge topic in and of itself. And it kind of exceeds our scope today, but it is absurdly simplistic to say if CO2 were really bad, we would invade China. It's so dumb, it's kind of hard to refute. Adults don't really think in this way. He then argues that CO2 emissions aren't really destroying all life on Earth. Well, we're not saying that that's what it is. It's sort of, again, that the argument isn't all life on Earth today is being destroyed by CO2. It's a straw man or a red herring. He argues that warmer temperatures are good because if it's warmer, you get more food growth. That's really complicated, but understand that when it's unseasonably warm, if you don't have more rain to go with it, you get drought. And drought is not good for crops. It kills crops. Or you've got to go and find more water to raise the same amount of food. That's also not good for the environment. So warmer being better for food production, also not true. And then he says Earth has been at this temperature before we had modern industry. That's true. There have been periods of warming on Earth before, but temperatures are only one part of what's going on. CO2 in the atmosphere has never been this high. That's a big piece of it. The fact that it's been warm before doesn't prove or disprove anything. So it took me, 7 minutes? This is like 2 + 2 = 5 type of stuff, and it takes a while to disprove it. Sam Harris said, and on this he's completely right, it's very easy to start a series of small fires that are really time-consuming to put out. It's much easier to start the fires than to put them out. And unfortunately, whether Chris Salcedo believes this stuff or he knows he's just feeding his audience the drivel and pablum that they so desperately want, some of his audience falls for it and believes it, and now we're sitting here trying to undo it. Really, really bad. And I mean, it's like his brain left his cranium. Really scary stuff. We have 2 things going on. Number one, the town hall rescheduled for December 28th due to technical difficulties. 6 p.m. December 28th. I hope you'll join us. It'll definitely be the last one of the year. Also, January 1st, we'll be doing a 1-day membership bomb, kicking off an election year with a huge membership discount. I would love for you to participate. All you need to do today is sign up for my mailing list at davidpakman.com. And then on the 1st, you'll be notified about exactly how to avail yourself of this incredible membership discount. One of our sponsors is Blinkist, who's been supporting the David Pakman Show longer than any other sponsor. Blinkist is the app that lets you listen to or read an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. Blinkist is the way to absorb those books you can't make time for. Blinkist takes top nonfiction titles, pulls out the book's key takeaways and insights, and gives it to you in the form of a text or audio explainer that you can consume in 15 minutes. With Blinkist, now you actually do have time to learn about all the things you've been wanting to tackle. On the Blinkist app, I just listened to This Is Your Mind on Plants by the great Michael Pollan. Super interesting, the history of caffeine and so many other things. Blinkist has you covered on podcasts too. Blinkist takes long episodes of popular podcasts and distills them into audio you can listen to in 15 minutes. With Blinkist, you can become knowledgeable about so many different things. You can have conversations with people about more topics. Blinkist makes you more well-rounded. Try Blinkist for free and get 25% off a subscription. Go to Blinkist.com/David Pakman. The link is down below. All right, remember that the David Pakman Show, it depends on your support. You can sign up at joinpakman.com. We do an extra show every day for our members called The Bonus Show. You can get access to it simply by signing up at joinpakman.com. Also, we include commercial-free audio and video streams of the show. All of it available at a very, very low rate. You can sign up at joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 to shave a pretty solid portion off of that. I encourage you to do that. You can also join the discussion on the David Pakman Show subreddit. That's at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Nearly 34,000 of our viewers and listeners are now subscribed there. Spotted a few interesting posts this morning that I wanted to talk about. One user asks, does David think the word Karen should be bannable? In the past, he said this is a racially charged word. No, I don't think it. I mean, listen, bannable by who? We don't ban people for using it. What I've said before is I make every effort not to use any words that are pejoratives grouping people by race. And while I don't know if it's explicit or not, Karen is essentially a pejorative about entitled white women. And so I see no reason to use the term. It's conceivable that it may have gotten into a YouTube title or two a while ago, but I've stopped using it. And as an editorial thing, I don't think it's particularly useful. The question about bans, I think, is related to recently. There was this big dust up on Twitch where two streamers that are kind of in our universe, Hassan Piker and Ian Vosh, were banned for using the word. I mean, I guess I have to be careful. It's a word, saltines would be in this category. Cheez-Its would be in this category. It's a pejorative for white people. They were banned. And a bunch of people on the left kind of came out defending it, saying, the word isn't really racially charged. I see it as racially charged. And so my take was, again, I don't think it's really a word progressives should use. It's a pejorative about white people. If you think about the word, it doesn't apply. You don't think about Asians when the word is said. You don't think about Native Americans. It's about white people. I avoid pejoratives that group people by race. Now, Twitch bans in terms of service, I don't know. I think it's all kind of dumb. But the point is, if you're banned for using the N-word, it's not shocking that you would be banned for using a pejorative about white people, even if they don't have the same historical weight, which they don't, and I admit. So that's my view about Karen. That's my view about the C word, the N-word, etc. Another post that I spotted, Biden official warns COVID explosion imminent. Yeah, so listen, there's bad news and then there's maybe okay news when it comes to COVID. I've not been covering the day-to-day of the Omicron variant because information is changing so quickly. If we look at the UK right now, they are seeing record cases. It's wild what's going on in the UK. That being said, the UK is doing a lot of testing, and the data we have right now still points to Omicron being more mild. Is it as mild as the flu, which is about a fifth as deadly as the original COVID strains? We don't know. Should people still get vaccinated and boosted? Yes, absolutely. Should the immunocompromised and others take serious precautions? Yes. But the potentially less bad thing is that at the individual level, Omicron may be milder and it continues to point that way. The problem is, you have to remember, as an individual, if Omicron is more mild, if you get it, you're less likely to be seriously ill. At the population level, if it's significantly more contagious, even though any one person's odds of getting really sick are lower, it'll still fill up the hospitals. And if you think about burden of disease, if it's half as deadly but 3 times as contagious, if I get it, it's less likely for me that it will be serious, but it's still going to lead to way more people getting very, very sick. So, I'm still waiting for something more definitive, but that's the way it looks so far. Last post I spotted, what is up with the weird lighting in David's studio? Is it just me or is it dimmer? Seems if he's trying to switch things up. No, what's going on is I've been on the road and our new mechanism, it's the audience is very fickle and emotional. And sometimes when it's clear that I'm on the road and I have a different background, people get very mad. I mean, it's crazy. Sometimes people get mad that I'm doing something. Sometimes people get mad that I'm not in the studio. So for a while now, when I'm on the road, I've been using a green screen and it replicates the home studio. Now, some people notice I'm in a different place because my mic is different or the lighting's a little different or whatever. This time around, the equipment I chose is not quite as good. So things are a little bit degraded. I've gone weeks in the past on the road and people haven't noticed when I've had other equipment with me. This time it's noticeable. We're going to try to do better next time. You can join the discussion at davidpakman.com/Reddit. Okay, it is, I don't know that I can say it's officially the 2022 midterms right now, but at least in the context of the former president Donald Trump jumping in full steam ahead on the 2022 midterms, things are getting going. Donald Trump has added another endorsement. This is an extremely polarizing endorsement. This is exactly the type of endorsement we were waiting for of an incumbent lunatic Trumpian Republican to show us, yes, Trump's going to be involved. Donald Trump has now endorsed radical, lunatic, extremist, disgusting Republican Congresswoman from Colorado, Lauren Boebert, or Lauren Boebert, as Ro Khanna called her. I kind of liked when Ro said Congresswoman Boebert. Sounds like a completely different person. Donald Trump putting out this endorsement laced with erratic capitalization, which I will mention, endorsement of Congresswoman Lauren Boebert. Congresswoman Lauren Boebert has done a fantastic job in her first term representing Colorado's 3rd District. I can't think of anything she's done, but okay. She is a fearless leader, a defender of the capitalized America First agenda, and a fighter against the capital L loser rhinos and capital R radical, capital D Democrats. She will continue to be tough on capital C crime, strong on capital B borders, and always protect our under siege Second Amendment. Lauren has my capital C complete and capital T total, capital E endorsement for her reelection. Why the random capitalization? We still don't know. Someone wrote to me and said, Trump is German. And in German, you have capitalized nouns. And that's not what Trump is doing, guys. I can assure you, Trump has no idea what's going on in German. So what's interesting about this? Okay, we suspected Trump was going to be very involved in 2022. And he's getting involved right now. Lauren Boebert has actually said she has already asked Donald Trump to go to her district and do a rally for her. If Trump gets involved to that level, it is going to be quite a midterm. And indeed, I think it is going to be quite a midterm. Also, the choice of this district is interesting because let's be frank, this is a very easy race and Trump is big on his record. Now, he lies about his endorsement record. Trump has previously said he's like, what did he say, 150-1 or something. His record is actually not that good. He mostly endorses incumbents and still, I think he only had like a 60-something% quote, success record with endorsements. But this is a really easy one. If you want to put points on the board and then use those points to justify running yourself in 2024, no Democrat has been the representative for Colorado's 3rd District since 2008. That was John Salazar. If you go before 2008, and remember, the elections are every 2 years in the House. If you go before 2008, you've got to go back to 1992 for the last Democrat to hold that seat. So in other words, since 1992, one Democrat has held the 3rd District of Colorado, and it's otherwise all Republicans. You look at the demographics, it's 65% rural, very favorable to Republicans. It's 71% white, pretty favorable to Republicans, although not as crazy skewed as some other districts. It is considered in the Cook political report, political values index, a Republican +6 race. And when you consider other factors, including the power of incumbency, that's a pretty solid Republican seat. So one of the things we will be paying attention to is, okay, Trump's going to be involved. He's going to be doing endorsements. Is he disproportionately doing them in the safest of safe districts? He is endorsing some challengers, but is he mostly endorsing incumbents? All of this is stuff that we're going to follow. But number one, it's clear he wants to be involved. And number two, these Trumpian races may very much influence what the Republican Party decides to do in 2024 and whether Donald Trump will even run. Earlier this week, we interviewed Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen said, Donald's not running in 24. And he's not running because he can't afford the hit to his ego to lose again. The counter would be, and it's not about who's right or wrong. There's no right or wrong yet because it hasn't happened. They're just predictions. The counter would be Trump ends up believing he can easily win everything. And so that may be a factor in him deciding to run. But step one is we don't even have to worry about 24. We're going to look at Trump's record in 22. We'll look at how he's welcomed in 22, and we'll look at how involved he gets. So this is the first one. Let me know who you think he will endorse next. We will have more on the endorsements and the 2022 campaign on our Instagram, which you can find at David Pakman Show. You can also find me on Instagram at david.pakman. We'll take a quick break and be back with much more. Don't forget that the best way to support the David Pakman Show is by becoming a member, which gives you access to the daily bonus show, the regular show with no commercials. You also get access to our entire archive of every episode dating back a really long time and plenty of other awesome membership perks. Go to joinpakman.com and use the coupon code BETTER21 for a huge discount. Joinpakman.com. It is great to be joined today by Sam Quinones, who is author of the New York Times bestseller Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic, and most recently, The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth. Sam, it's great to have you on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, David. Good to be with you.
So, I mean, just from the titles of the two books, right? There's been a change in what is happening in the United States as far as drugs go. Can you talk a little bit about? I mean, how has the landscape changed from when you were researching the first book and then now the most recent one?
Sure, of course. It really has changed dramatically, and quite unexpectedly to me, honestly. When I was writing the first book, the idea was to write the story of how we had gone from a country that had decided, or a medical establishment that decided the idea was a good one, to massively and excessively, in my opinion, prescribe narcotic painkillers, opioid painkillers for all manner of pain that they had not been used for before. And not just that, but like lots of refills and kind of with the understanding or the belief that these pills would not be at all addictive to anyone who was a pain patient. That helped a lot of people, fair to say. It also created an enormous new population of people who actually were addicted to these pills, who depended on these pills. They went to the street. Couldn't find them very well on the street. It was very expensive, and eventually a certain percentage of those folks moved on to heroin. These pills have the drugs in them are very similar to heroin. The underworld then took over, and that's what led to the next book. The underworld began, particularly in the Mexican trafficking world, began providing the heroin. They then figured out that actually it's a much better idea to make a synthetic form of heroin, which we now know is fentanyl. You don't need any of the issues that, land or any of that kind of stuff. And so the transformation kind of began, and really about 5 years ago, not long after Dreamland came out, you began to see fentanyl kind of take over, and now the country is essentially effectively covered with fentanyl, which is an opioid, but a synthetic one. You don't use plants to make it, and that means that you can make it year round if you have the chemicals. At the same time, methamphetamine is also now covered the country because of a new way of making that as well. And so you see, really, we're in the era of synthetic drugs, whereas before it was the doctors and the classic underworld providing heroin. Now it's pretty much the entire source comes from the underworld, and it's now just synthetic
Yeah.
drugs in our supply.
In advance of our interview, I read an article that the exact name I now don't remember, but it's something like, can you even really call it meth anymore? And it talks about how now this mechanism called P2P is being used for the manufacture of meth. Can you talk about why that's been so crucial to the dominance of meth?
Sure, that was an excerpt of the book, in fact, that was run in the Atlantic. And what happened with methamphetamine was interesting. Years ago, the Mexican trafficking world industrialized the production of meth using a chemical known as ephedrine. Ephedrine is a decongestant. You find it in Sudafed pills. It's chemically very similar to meth, so a couple of tweaks and it turns into meth. It's a kind of a euphoric high, very sociable. You want to be around people, you're jabbering away, and they made huge amounts of it, but they were always limited by the amount of ephedrine they could get, and they could get tons of it, but it was really only enough to cover parts of the Western United States, never went east the Mississippi River. Eventually, though, the Mexican government got figured this out, and the response was to make ephedrine essentially illegal except for certain pharmaceutical companies to produce. That meant that the trafficking world now had a whole body of knowledge about methamphetamine and no way to really make it, but there is another way of making methamphetamine. And they began to figure that out. It uses a precursor known as you said, P2P, phenyl 2-propanone. And P2P is actually very messy. It stinks and all that when you turn it into methamphetamine. It does have one benefit, though, to the trafficking world, and that is that you can make it many, many different ways with lots of different industrial, widely available industrial chemicals. All these chemicals are legal. They're very toxic, but you can, if the government cracks down on this combination of chemicals, you can use this other one, and there are many of these combinations. So it allows the trafficking world, if they can get the chemicals, to produce this stuff in staggering quantities. And essentially that's what's happening, because they have access to 2 very large ports and several smaller ones on the Pacific coast of Mexico, through which they get access to the world chemical markets, and they can bring in all the chemicals that they like. Some of these chemicals are actually made in Mexico, of course. And so what you begin to see, beginning in about 2012, 13, is the production of it is just staggering. I mean, just unbelievable quantities of the stuff, so much so that it crosses the Mississippi River, goes across, and now is up into New England, effectively covering the country. And it's a remarkable, I guess, dubious achievement. But there's one other thing that's very much a part of that story, and that is this: that as this methamphetamine begins to really march across the country, first in the Western United States, then the Midwest in 2017 or so, then up into New England in 2019, it's also accompanied by very severe, rapid onset symptoms of paranoia and hallucination, symptoms of schizophrenia, essentially. Very intense paranoia, very vivid hallucinations, delusions, people. So it's accompanied by mental illness, and very quickly that mental illness leads lots of people to be homeless. So you see, as this meth marches across the country, you also find big escalations in the amount of mental illness and homelessness, and eventually also tent encampments, because these folks in this situation, in this condition, are not going to be living in homeless shelters.
Right. I want to talk about that next, because there's been these encampments are a big topic of political controversy. And I, as someone who is, unabashedly on the left, I consider myself a progressive. The research I've done makes me question the wisdom of the kind of let's just leave the encampments, because if we don't have a great place to send people, who are we to take away the one place that they found? And the piece for me in all of this that makes me hesitate about taking that approach is, it's not, when you consider the drug addiction component, there seems to be zero possibility that folks get out of that cycle if they remain in the encampment. Now, breaking up the encampment raises all sorts of other questions. Where do people go? Is it safe? I'm not denying that. but it seems that you have no possibility of dealing with the drug component if the encampments stay. What's your experience with that?
No, I would say that in talking with people who work with these folks and recovering addicts as well, I would say that's absolutely true. And it's really actually a little bit more even serious than that, because talking with folks about this, you very quickly get the idea that the effect of this methamphetamine is really almost at least semi-permanent brain damage. It's not like with ephedrine meth, you would stay up for several days and you would begin to see kind of shadow people, and then you would sleep it off and you would return to coherence. Not that this was good for you, it just was not the damage. Now people are saying, and I was just speaking with a homeless shelter provider here in Nashville, where I'm now living for a while, and she was saying that the brain devastation makes it so that you can't really teach these folks to function. So the longer they are exposed out on the street, particularly in tent encampments, which really exist as vectors of methamphetamine frequently, even though, of course, tents were meant with good intentions. They're really kind of a place now where meth flows freely. That's why they exist, because people, it's like the bar where everybody knows your name in a sense. Well, this is the same thing. And so what really is happening is that prolonged exposure to this is very scary. And I've met people who've recovered from it and are now sober, but they still know, they tell me, several of them told me this, I still know I'm not the same. My brain is still not fully healed. And some of these folks have been sober a year or two. There's still that paranoia. There's still that the memory is really faded. And certainly it takes weeks, maybe even months, for the personality of a person to return. So it's the prolonged exposure in these tent encampments, as you say, I think makes it extraordinarily difficult for those folks to ever recover to something close to what they were beforehand.
So sometimes it's very popular to talk about Portugal when one talks about drug policy and treatment. And one of the things that sometimes folks don't know about Portugal is it's not that in Portugal there's no consequences for drug addiction. It's that they are handled as health issues rather than criminal issues. But there are consequences. There can be mandated treatment. People are taken out of the equivalent of the encampment, so to speak. So in thinking about solutions, like what has worked, what might work?
Well, I do believe that some form of mandated treatment is what's necessary here, because what you're looking for in all treatment, you have to come to a point where you embrace your sobriety, where you embrace recovery. The problem is that is not possible on the street today. First of all, you have fentanyl, which will kill you before you ever develop any kind of readiness for treatment, right? The whole idea you need to be ready for treatment. It's true, but the problem is, how do you get there? And how long does it take? And I think on the street it's very difficult. And within the meth encampment, in the meth world, it's very hard for people to, first of all, in order for recovery to take place, you actually have to be able to talk rationally with other people. That's a human connection that is essential for that process to move forward. And if you are speaking in what they call in psychology word salad, so the jumbles of words and tumbling out of your mouth, you have no idea what people have no idea what you're saying. There's no ability to develop that deep connection. So first and foremost, detox, and prolonged detox, not a few days, but weeks. And then an idea that forced treatment, because the drugs control is so profound. And that's what a homeless outreach guy told me. He'd been doing this 5 years. And he says, everybody I've offered treatment to and housing to, when I get them into housing, very quickly they just bolt and they leave and they run back to the encampment. So you need to get people away from that, someplace secure, someplace where they are mandated treatment, someplace where they begin the process, the careful nudging, gradual process of coming to embrace their own sobriety, which will happen, but it does need that separation from the drug.
That's an important point, which is when addiction is a factor, just giving homeless folks homes alone does not actually solve the problem. Are there communities in the U.S. that are doing this correctly?
I mean, I think with methamphetamine, it's so new. The story really, I broke this story in the book and in this thing in the Atlantic, about methamphetamine, and I think many communities kind of almost didn't know what they had. First of all, COVID has kind of overshadowed everything last year or two, and then before that, the opioid epidemic overshadowed the meth thing. So people have really not come to understand the deep issues involved with methamphetamine. Some places have.
Uh-oh, Sam, we just lost you. We first lost your video and then we lost your audio. Now you're back. Sorry, yeah, you just glitched for a moment there.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, but now you're back. You're smooth now.
Oh, okay. Well, I would say that a lot of places are still trying to figure this thing out because, first of all, I think the opioid epidemic overshadowed the meth problem, and then COVID did the same.
Yeah.
So what we're seeing now is people are just kind of now coming to understand this. I would say that in Clarksburg, West Virginia, I write about in the book, several chapters in the book, they tried the housing first idea. And the folks that they put into housing there was some refurbished apartments that they were able to put them in, and they destroyed the apartments. They like $100,000 worth of damage to these apartments. There was no way they could do it. So I think people are just now, I mean, really, because this story just breaking with this book and all, people are just now coming to the point where they're saying, let's see if what we can try. I spoke with a politician in Northern California who was thinking, we were talking about the possibility of using empty big box stores to put a kind of controlled tent encampment, like put tents, but within a secure big box store, controlled entry and exit and so on, and have that be a place where maybe people detox for the first, but I haven't found anybody who's been able to deal significantly with this issue that this new meth coming out of Mexico has presented over the last several years.
Sometimes people will call in and they'll say, hey, are you for legalization of all drugs, just like we're starting to see with cannabis in some states? And, I feel very strongly that decriminalization is really important, and there's a number of reasons why that seems like an easier thing to think about, and there are good examples from around the world. When I think about like recreational meth or recreational heroin, these drugs seem so destructive to just one's basic ability to exist in the world that I have not been convinced that recreational legalization of these makes any sense. How do you conceive of this issue?
No, I think not. I guess, I would like to see, here's what I would like to see, I guess, first. I would like to see us legalize marijuana in a mature and adult way. Mm-hmm. We are doing it as if, if it's a consumable, then we need to have those places inspected, like food factories are inspected. If it's a medicine, we need to have them inspected like factories that produce drugs are inspected. I think it's absolutely insane in a time of climate change that we allow indoor grown marijuana, a plant that grows beautifully outdoors. That should not be possible. And the idea too, that we are not going to, after all, never going to be arresting people for selling marijuana is crazy too. Now you're seeing dispensaries in California say, we have to compete now with illegal vendors who don't have to pay taxes or electricity or rent and all the rest. And so you need to lower our taxes. No, what we need to do is we need a prolonged time period, probably many years, of very aggressive enforcement of people who are selling the drug illegally, so that there won't be that unfair competition for folks who actually have to pay rent and electricity and taxes and all the rest that we want for like any liquor store or any other place. To me, this feels like, and I also believe that we need to really question what the potency should be that we allow for commercial sale. It's insane. 40% THC, 90% THC in vapes and this kind. I mean, and these little candy things. I mean, when Joe Camel started marketing cigarettes to kids, the entire country was up in arms, and yet it's okay to have these little gummy bears and all that kind of stuff. To me, it feels like, and I think part of this grows from the fact that we still don't have federal marijuana legislation, and really federal marijuana legislation needs to put all of this and much more into place. But a lot of this stuff seems to me to be almost juvenile. Like, it doesn't really matter, dude. It's just pot. Well, it's not pot. It's very potent stuff, and it needs to be treated that way. And we need to approach it like adults. I want to see that done first, and then we can turn our attention to whether other drugs. But I don't really see it happening until we do this right.
No doubt about it. The latest book is The Least of Us, True Tales of America and Hope in the Time of Fentanyl and Meth. We've been speaking with the book's author, Sam Quinones. Sam, great having you on today.
Love being with you, David. Thanks so much.
If you value what we do at the David Pakman Show, remember to support us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, where you can get access to behind the scenes videos, the Daily Bonus Show, the commercial-free Daily Show, as well as special discounts on merch, including hats, hoodies, mugs, and t-shirts. You can support the show for as little as $2 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. So I have for you today basically the perfect example of when Democrats just hurt themselves and make themselves seem like Republicans and make it harder for voters to want to come out and vote for them in key elections like the midterms or 2024 or whenever. So this is what happened. And I'm not going to be unrealistic in my analysis of this, and you'll see what I mean in a second. Nancy Pelosi was asked during a press conference yesterday, hey, what about a stock trading ban for members of Congress? We have all these issues with members of Congress, meaning the House and Senate, accused circumstantially in these conditions where they seem to be making stock moves based on things that they know and everybody else doesn't. It's not technically insider trading because of the committee memberships, et cetera, that these members have. And there's actually an exception where it's not considered insider trading in some of these situations, although in some you could argue that it is. And it just looks terrible. It makes it seem as though members of Congress are using information that they learn through their roles as elected officials, supposedly serving the public to enrich themselves. What about a stock trading ban? And Nancy Pelosi just goes, nah, I mean, we're a capitalist country. It's just, and it's such a, even if you're not going to do it, it's the worst possible response. So let's take a look at the clip and then we'll talk about it more.
Should members of Congress and their spouses be banned from trading individual stocks while serving in Congress?
No, I don't know to the second one. We have a responsibility to report in the stock, on the stock, but I'm not familiar with that 5-month review, but if people aren't reporting, they should be.
Why should they be banned?
Because this is a free market and people, we're a free market economy. They should be able to participate in that.
Yeah. So, I mean, listen, I know Nancy Pelosi doesn't support that. Nancy Pelosi is one of the people, along with her husband, who regularly make individual stock trades, options, etc. And I'm sure it makes them a whole bunch of money. So, I don't think for a second Nancy Pelosi at this point in her career can be convinced to ban members of the House and Senate from trading in individual stocks. So I'm not naive in that sense. But this is sort of the worst way that you could possibly answer it. And I know that why would I encourage politicians to be dishonest? But when I think about winning, when I see this, I think, well, so are they different than Republicans or not? The most sort of insidious part of the House and Senate being allowed to trade individual stocks, it's not just that they can have access to information that lets them make money. It's they could actually make legislative decisions to help companies in which they own stocks or would own stocks. So this is really a very serious issue. So if Nancy Pelosi just threw a bone and said, hey, you know what? I'm just as concerned as you are. We are here to serve the public. We are not here to enrich ourselves. And I am willing to hear any good idea as to how to prevent members of the House and Senate from acting inappropriately based on our privileged positions or whatever. and then say, bring me a proposal, and then never do it. Like, in other words, I know it's not going to happen. And so this is an answer where it's not only that she's not going to do it, she doesn't even seem to care enough to appear as though it matters to her that members of the House and Senate not enrich themselves with stock trades based on information. And then there's sort of like a subsequent layer as well, which is, what about the transparency? Because there's, as was being mentioned there, there's this delay for the reporting of transactions for members of the House and Senate. You could have a much faster turnaround on that. Everything is executed electronically at this point in time. There's no reason for any delay in the reporting. Make a public record immediately of the trades of the members of the House and Senate. And so at the end of the day, I don't have a problem with people making money. We're talking about 535 Americans here, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate, who are choosing, presumably, to go into public service. They're not being forced to do it. We're not even saying they can't make money. We're not even saying they should have to sell all the stocks that they have. Just turn over control of them. I think it's too much to say you can't buy or sell anything. Nothing can be bought or sold in your name while you're in the House or Senate. Appoint someone. You're not involved in the day-to-day. Some call it a blind trust. They can make the decisions for you so that when you are deciding, okay, who do we give a contract to? What kind of regulatory infrastructure do I push for in this industry or that? But in the back of your mind, you know you own stocks in certain ones of those industries. At least the stock trading decisions could be made by somebody else. And this is the type of thing that makes people say both sides are terrible. Neither side cares about us. They just care about themselves. And this is the stuff that makes me say Democrats are just another party concerned primarily with self-preservation. In that sense, Republican Party, Democratic Party, it's basically the same thing. The Democratic Party has more policy, I agree with, certainly. And it's such a small thing. 535 people in Congress. You can't trade individual stocks while you're in the House or Senate. You could trade mutual funds, even though people don't typically trade them in the same way. You can keep the stocks you had beforehand, just turn over control of them. That's it. And, I am not optimistic. I know that this is like a relatively small thing triggering this reaction, but overall, I am not super optimistic about 2022. And I know we have to still fight for it, but I mean, what exactly has been done about white supremacy and extremism? What has been done on voting rights? I guess now they want to take it up. Student loans, there was never going to be anything done on student loans other than make people start repaying them. Something federal on cannabis, etc. This is a layup. At least just give an answer that looks good. I am committed to making sure, and then do nothing. She doesn't even care enough to do that. It's absolutely bonkers. And if Democrats lose, it won't be a shock. It won't be a shock, and we will have many explanations as to why. Her answer is not the reason why, but it certainly doesn't help. We're continuing to track what's happening with this Omicron variant. And booster mandates are starting. The United Kingdom is setting new records. It is an explosion of information and of panic. And I understand the worry. And I also still don't know that it is warranted on the basis of what we know about Omicron. So let's go through a few different aspects here. Businesses, many employers and universities are now saying fully vaccinated means 3 shots, not 2. Now, however serious Omicron is, the early data is that if you have 3 shots, you are significantly less likely to get a symptomatic infection of Omicron than if you have 2 shots. Now, on asymptomatic, we don't yet really know. On effectiveness, on against serious illness or death, we're still getting information. It seems 3 shots are somewhat better, but 3 shots seems significantly better than 2 against Omicron, against symptomatic illness. So that's really important. So the Metropolitan Opera yesterday said, if you want to be an eligible audience member or an employee, you need that 3rd shot. Georgetown, NYU, some private colleges have said you're going to need your 3rd shot. Number of universities where I know people working say that when you come back for the spring semester, you've got to have that 3rd shot. The NFL is requiring coaches and staff to get booster shots by December 27th. And the real question here is what is actually going on with the Omicron variant? And I know we continue to say it's early, we still need more data, we still need to wait. It continues to be that on average, if you get the Omicron variant, you are less likely to get really, really sick. By virtue of being more contagious, which it appears to be, the burden on society can still be large. And we are seeing, even in advance of Omicron being the reason, even still with Delta, we're starting to see hospitals in different states increasingly fill up. So that's one aspect of what's going on. The CDC has issued a forecast that cases weekly are going to be up to 1.3 million by Christmas Day, and that deaths are going to surge 73% to over 15,000 a week when and as Omicron becomes the dominant strain. And again, some people hear that and they say, well, hold on a second. If it's less serious, why would deaths go up? And again, you could have something that's half as serious but 3 times as contagious, and you would still see deaths go up 50%. I mean, it's very, very crude math. It doesn't exactly work that way, but that's basically the way that it is. In the meantime, the UK is seeing absolutely record cases. A number of different countries are seeing really, really insane numbers. And the good news, if there is any in the UK, is that while the cases are going up dramatically as Omicron takes over, deaths due to COVID are actually down over the last 2 weeks. Now that may reverse. What's the possible counterpoint to it's very spreadable but less severe? The counterpoint would be, what if there's more of a delay before you get really sick? In other words, I think at one point the average interval between infection and death was 17 days. At one point, it doesn't really matter, but at one point it was roughly 17 days. Is it possible that Omicron causes mild disease for, 5 weeks, and then you get really sick and die? Doctors say it's possible, but it's not very likely. So that's the good news so far that we can point to. Lastly, the White House, there's been this question of, would the U.S. shut down again to the extent that the U.S. ever did shut down? I think the answer is no for a couple of different reasons, unless there were to be a more severe variant, which we don't seem to have at this point in time. Number one, at the state level, there are very few states at this point that seem willing to do anything even remotely approximating a shutdown. That's number one. Number two, the White House is saying we are not going to do that. We are not going to have sweeping shutdowns. But we are seeing signs that certainly raise questions as to what the policy should be. The hospitals becoming overrun, events being postponed, some colleges and universities already going back to remote. So there are signs, but the White House insists it's not going to happen. Again, if you get your third shot and that actually is 70% effective at preventing symptomatic illness, and this is a more spreadable but less serious variant, if people do the right things, you shouldn't have to shut down. If the shutdowns become a real possibility, it would overwhelmingly be because a lot of people aren't doing the things that are available to us to do. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think will happen in the next 1 to 2 months? We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Yesterday, we covered the 27 vaccine refusal dismissals in the Air Force. And I got an interesting call about that. Listen to this.
Mr. Packman, sir, just some quick information on the Air Force vaccination. I'm an Air Force civilian, and you mentioned the 27 service members that have been discharged so far. Just a clarification, those 27 are the ones that not only refused the vaccine, but also did not apply for a religious or medical exemption.
Apply for and get, important message too.
And so there are still many, many, many members in the Air Force and the other services that are going through the exemption process. Most likely they will all get declined, at which point they will have to have the same choice that the 27 who have already been discharged had, and will either have to get out or get vaccinated. But
yeah, that is a good point. All, as far as I know, all branches of the military are being very strict about these various exemptions, and new recruits are being forced to sign as a condition of even starting that they understand they will be required to get the COVID vaccine. So that's a good point. The number may go up. It is still quite low. We've got a great bonus show for you today. It's not looking like Build Back Better is going to pass this year. I don't know if many of you will be shocked by that, but it's not going to happen. We'll talk about that. New Zealand has a new cigarette ban that is different than other countries we will talk about. And also, San Francisco Bay Area car break-ins are on the rise, and some car owners are leaving their trunks open. We will explain why on today's bonus show. Sign up at joinpacman.com. We will see you then. Thanks a lot for watching today's show. I just want to take a second to tell you about today's sponsors. Blinkist is the app that helps you become a more well-rounded person by letting you read or listen to an entire nonfiction book in just 15 minutes. You can try it for free and get 25% off a subscription by going to Blinkist.com/David Pakman.